Welcome to the Sleep Library. Tonight, we're going to explore something that governs every moment of our lives, yet something we rarely stop to consider: the history of timekeeping. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow. There's no need to remember any of this. No test tomorrow. No quiz at the end. Just let these words wash over you like gentle waves as we wander through the centuries together, observing how humanity learned to measure the unmeasurable, to count the uncountable, to hold time itself in the palm of their hand. Settle deeper into your pillows. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the mattress. Its light growing softer, warmer, painting the western sky in shades of amber and rose and violet. That was evening. The stars emerged one by one, like candles being lit in an infinite cathedral, the darkness deepening from blue to indigo to the deepest black. That was night. That was time measured by the body and the earth. Time that was felt rather than counted. Time that moved in your bones and blood. People woke when light touched their eyelids. They worked while the sun provided illumination. They ate when hunger called. They slept when darkness and exhaustion made work impossible. There was a simplicity to this, though not necessarily an ease. Life was hard, of course, in ways we can barely imagine now. But there was also a harmony with natural rhythms that we've largely lost. The seasons, too, marked time, not in neat blocks of 3 months each, but in the gradual changes that announce themselves through temperature, through the behavior of animals, through the growth and dormancy of plants. In spring, the world awakened. Buds swelled on branches. Birds returned from southern lands, filling the air with their calls. The ground softened. Seeds could be planted. In summer, everything grew. Days stretched long and warm. Work extended from dawn to dusk. Crops ripened in the fields. In autumn, the harvest came, a time of both plenty and urgency, gathering what had grown before the cold could claim it. Leaves turned gold and red and brown, falling like gentle rain. In winter, the world rested. Days shortened, cold deepened. People stayed close to their fires, told stories, repaired tools, waited for the wheel to turn again. This was the first calendar, written not on paper, but in the earth itself. And within each day, within each season, there were smaller markers. A rooster's crow at dawn. The morning dew that would evaporate by mid-morning, the angle of light through a window, the lengthening of shadows as afternoon gave way to evening, the evening song of birds settling into their nests, the appearance of the first stars. Monks in medieval monasteries, centuries later, would still use these natural markers to structure their days of prayer. Matins at the darkest hour before dawn, lauds as the sun rose, prime at the first hour of daylight. And so on through the day, each prayer time marked not by a clock, but by the position of the sun, by the quality of light, by the felt sense of time's passage. But humans, being the curious and methodical creatures we are, wanted more precision. We wanted to divide the day into smaller portions, to create agreements about when to meet, when to work, when to rest. We wanted to pin time down, to make it something we could point to and say, there, that, now. And so, slowly, across many centuries and many cultures, we began to invent ways to measure time's passage. Let your breathing deepen as we explore these inventions together. Part 2. The first timekeepers, shadows and water. The earliest timekeepers were simple, almost elemental in their design. They used the materials at hand, stone, water, sand, and the forces of nature, sunlight, gravity, to mark the hours. The shadow clock, used by the ancient Egyptians as early as 1500 BCE, was nothing more than a flat piece of stone or wood with another stone or piece of wood placed upright at one end, like an L lying on its side. As the sun moved across the sky, the shadow cast by that upright piece would move across the flat surface, which had been marked with lines denoting different times of day. Picture it, a priest or timekeeper sitting beside this device in the hot Egyptian sun, the air shimmering with heat. The shadow, dark and crisp-edged against the pale stone, creeping slowly, slowly across the marked surface. The timekeeper, watching, waiting, and when the shadow reached a particular line, calling out the hour to those who needed to know. There was something meditative about this, wasn't there? The job of watching time pass. Not rushing it, not filling it with tasks, but simply observing it, marking its passage. Sitting in the sun, watching a shadow move. Hours of stillness. Hours of patience. The gnomon, a vertical stick or pillar, was an even simpler version of this technology. The ancient Greeks used them, placing them in public squares where anyone could read the time by observing the shadow. These would eventually evolve into sundials, with their circular faces marked with hours, their gnomons angled to account for the latitude of their location. If you've ever seen an old sundial in a garden or town square, you've seen the descendant of these ancient timekeepers. Perhaps you've crouched down to read one, aligning your eye with the shadow's edge, reading the Roman numerals etched into weathered stone or verdigris-covered bronze. There's often a motto engraved on sundials, reminding us of time's passage. Tempus fugit, time flies. Or carpe diem, seize the day. Though perhaps the most poignant is simply, I count only the sunny hours. Because, of course, shadow clocks had an obvious limitation. They required sun. On cloudy days, or during the night, they were useless, standing silent and blind, while time continued its inevitable march. And so, inventors turned to other methods. The water clock, or clepsydra, from the Greek words meaning water thief, emerged as a solution to the problem of marking time in darkness or shade. These devices measured time by the regulated flow of water from one container to another. In its simplest form, imagine a clay pot with a small hole near the bottom. You fill the pot with water at sunrise, and as the water drips slowly, steadily out of the hole, drip, 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 the level inside the pot descends. By marking lines on the inside of the pot, you could measure how much time had passed based on where the water level now stood. There's something deeply calming about this image, isn't there? Water dripping, one drop at a time. Steady, predictable. The soft sound, drip, 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 like a very slow heartbeat, like the pulse of time itself made audible. More sophisticated water clocks were developed across many cultures. The ancient Chinese, Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans all created increasingly complex versions. Some featured multiple vessels with water flowing from one to another in sequence. Some had floats that rose or fell with the water level, moving pointers across marked dials. Some even had small figurines that would move, or bells that would ring at certain hours. In ancient Athens, water clocks were used in the law courts to time speeches. Each speaker was allotted a certain amount of time, measured by the emptying of a clepsydra. When the water ran out, your time was up, no matter how compelling your argument. A bailiff would stand beside the water clock, watching the level drop, and when the last drop strained away, he would call out that the speaker's time had ended. Imagine being that bailiff. Day after day, standing beside the water clock. Watching the water descend, marking its slow journey from full to empty. The murmur of voices around you, arguments about property and justice and honor. But your attention focused on that slowly dropping waterline. The sunlight slanting through high windows. The smell of oil lamps and papyrus. The cool stone floor beneath your sandals. And always that slow movement of water, that gentle counting of minutes. Similar in principle were sand clocks, which we still call hourglasses, though they were rarely used to measure a full hour in ancient times. Sand flowing through a narrow opening between two glass bulbs. The soft whisper of grains tumbling over each other. That mesmerizing stream of sand, like a tiny waterfall frozen in glass. You've probably watched one, haven't you? It's hard to look away. The sand falling grain by grain, accumulating in the lower bulb, forming a small mountain that grows and grows. Sand clocks had advantages over water clocks. They weren't affected by temperature. Water could freeze in winter or evaporate in summer heat. They were portable, small enough to carry, sealed so the sand couldn't be lost. They were used on ships, where the rocking of the waves made water clocks impractical. A ship's boy would be assigned to watch the glass, turning it each time the sand ran out, marking the passage of time at sea. Picture that boy, young, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, on his first voyage, standing on a deck that rises and falls with the swells. The smell of salt and tar and canvas, the creak of ropes and timbers, the endless gray-green of the ocean in all directions. And in his hands, a small hourglass, the sand whispering through. And when the last grain falls, he turns it over, marks the time on a slate, begins his watch again. Hour after hour, through day and night, measuring time by falling sand, while the ship cuts through dark water beneath a ceiling of stars. These early timekeepers, shadows, water, sand, weren't particularly accurate by our modern standards. They couldn't measure minutes and seconds. They drifted, accumulated errors, but they were enough. They provided a structure, a way of agreeing on time, a method of coordination. And there was a gentleness to them, wasn't there? A softness. Time measured by natural processes. The sun's movement, water's flow, sand's descent. Time that you could see and hear. Time that had texture and presence. Let your mind rest with these images for a moment. Sand falling, water dripping, shadows lengthening. Feel your own body relaxing, sinking deeper into rest, like sand settling, like water finding its level. Part 3. The Mechanical Revolution. The First Clocks. The next great leap in timekeeping came in medieval Europe, in the monasteries and cathedral towns, where the measurement of time was not just practical, but sacred. The canonical hours, the times set aside for prayer throughout the day and night, needed to be observed with regularity. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. 8 times a day the monks would gather to pray, and someone needed to know when each hour arrived. The first mechanical clocks emerged sometime in the late 13th century. We don't know exactly when or where or who invented them. History sometimes loses these details, and perhaps that's fitting for a device meant to mark time's passage, its own origin fading into the unmeasured past. These early clocks were not small, delicate instruments sitting on mantelpieces. They were enormous constructions of iron and wood, sometimes filling entire rooms in clock towers. They were powered by weights, heavy stones or lead masses that would slowly descend under the pull of gravity. And as they descended, they would turn gears, and the gears would turn other gears, and through this chain of mechanical advantage, the clock would mark the hours. But there was a problem. If the weights simply fell freely, the clock would run too fast, the gears spinning wildly until the weights reached the bottom. What was needed was a way to regulate the descent, to make it steady and controlled. The solution was called the verge escapement, and it's a beautiful piece of mechanical logic. Imagine a vertical rod, the verge, with 2 flat pieces called pallets extending from it in opposite directions. A toothed wheel, the escape wheel, is positioned so that its teeth engage with these pallets. As the weight tries to pull the wheel around, one tooth catches on a pallet, stopping the wheel. But the verge is connected to a horizontal bar with weights on each end, called a foliate, and this bar swings back and forth. As it swings, it rotates the verge, which lifts one pallet away from the escape wheel. The wheel turns, advancing one tooth, until that tooth catches on the other pallet. The folio swings back, the verge rotates the other direction. The second pallet lifts, and another tooth escapes. Tick, tock. The first mechanical heartbeat of measured time. You don't need to understand the mechanism fully. Let it be a pleasant blur of gears and weights and swinging arms. What matters is the result. A steady, repeating rhythm. An artificial pulse. Time no longer measured by the sun or water or sand, but by the swing of a weighted bar and the escape of gear teeth. These early tower clocks didn't have faces or hands at first. they simply rang bells to mark the hours. A clock tower in a town or monastery was essentially a machine for ringing bells at regular intervals. The clock mechanism would, at the appointed hour, release a hammer that would strike a bell. One strike for the first hour, two for the second, and so on. Imagine living in a medieval town in the 14th century. Your day structured not by glancing at a watch, but by listening for bells. You're working in your home, or your shop, or your field, and you hear, carried on the wind, the deep bronze voice of the town clock striking. Bong, bong, bong. 3 strikes, 3 o'clock. Time, perhaps, to pause your work, to take a drink of ale, to rest for a moment before continuing. The sound of clock bells became the sound of time itself. Church bells had always marked important moments, calls to prayer, warnings of danger, announcements of deaths and weddings. But clock bells were different. They didn't mark events. They marked time's passage, abstract and continuous. They created a new kind of awareness, a new relationship with the hours. Let yourself imagine that sound now. A deep, resonant bell struck by a mechanical hammer. The initial impact, bright and clear, then the long decay, the note sustained by the massive bell, gradually fading until it's swallowed by silence. And then, an hour later, it comes again. Reliable as sunrise, steady as the stars. Inside the clock tower, someone had to maintain these machines. A clock keeper, appointed and paid by the town or monastery, responsible for winding the weights back up to the top each day, for oiling the gears, for adjusting the mechanism when it ran too fast or too slow. Picture this person. Let's call him Thomas, though his name might have been anything. Thomas arrives each morning, climbing the spiral stone stairs of the tower, his footsteps echoing in the narrow space. The stairs are worn smooth by decades, centuries perhaps, of feet ascending and descending. He counts them as he climbs. He knows there are exactly 73 steps from the ground to the clock room. The clock room is dim, lit only by narrow windows cut into the thick stone walls. The clock dominates the space, a construction of dark iron, wheels and pinions and arbors, all fitted together with the precision available to a medieval craftsman, which is to say, impressive precision, though not perfect. The weights hang on ropes or chains, large stones or iron masses, suspended in a tall shaft that extends down through the tower. Thomas inspects the mechanism. He watches the foliate swing back and forth, tick, tock, listening to the rhythm, feeling it in his chest. Too fast, and the clock will gain time, running ahead of the sun. Too slow, and it will fall behind. He makes small adjustments, adding a tiny weight to the foliate to slow it down, or removing one to speed it up. This is done by feel, by experience, by a sense developed over years of standing in this room, listening to this particular clock's particular rhythm. He oils the bearings with rendered fat, carefully, sparingly. Too much, and it will drip down, collecting dirt. Too little, and the metal will wear, the gears will bind. His hands smell of the tallow, and of the iron, and of the stone dust that seems to permeate everything in the tower. When the weights have descended nearly to the bottom of their shaft, he cranks them back up to the top. This is hard work. These weights are heavy, sometimes hundreds of pounds. He turns the crank, feeling the resistance, the weight fighting gravity, being pulled back up against its nature. Crank by crank, slowly, his breathing deepening with the effort. This is his meditation, his daily ritual. Climbing the stairs, checking the mechanism, winding the weights, keeping time. And what does Thomas think about as he does this work? Perhaps he thinks about the permanence of time, how it passes regardless of human effort. Perhaps he thinks about dinner, or his wife, or the pain in his knee that's been troubling him lately. Perhaps he doesn't think at all, simply exists in the moment, his attention absorbed by the rhythm of the clock, the weight of the crank, the dim light falling through narrow windows. The clock he tends is not particularly accurate. It might drift by 15 minutes or more in a day. But it's far more accurate than anything that came before. And that's enough. Time is being measured, regulated, made into something consistent and shared. As decades passed, as centuries turned, these mechanical clocks improved. Clockmakers refined the escapement mechanism, developed new designs, added complications. That's the technical term for additional functions beyond just marking hours. They added faces with hands, so you could see the time at a glance, not just hear it. They added minute hands, though not yet second hands. Those would come later. They made clocks smaller, compact enough to sit on a table, to hang on a wall. By the 15th and 16th centuries, clockmaking had become a specialized craft, a trade requiring years of apprenticeship. A master clockmaker's workshop was a place of precision and patience, filled with tiny gears and delicate springs, with tools designed for working at a scale where the width of a hair mattered. Let your mind drift into such a workshop for a moment. A room with large windows to let in maximum light. A heavy wooden workbench, its surface scarred with decades of use. Ranked along the wall, drawers and compartments holding parts, gears of different sizes, springs of different strengths, pins and arbors and jewels. The air smells of metal and oil, with an undertone of wood and old paper. The clockmaker sits at his bench, hunched slightly forward, his attention focused absolutely on the tiny mechanism before him. In his hand, a delicate tool, perhaps a pair of tweezers, or a small file, or a burnisher. He's working on a gear, filing one tooth to exactly the right shape, the right size. Too large, and it will bind against its neighbor. Too small, and there will be play in the system, sloppiness, inaccuracy. He works slowly, checking constantly, filing a little, checking again. There's no hurry here. A good clock might take months to make. Rushing would only introduce errors. So, the clockmaker works with steady patience, day after day, piece by piece, building a mechanism that will, if he does his work well, mark time with reasonable accuracy for decades, perhaps centuries. As you lie here listening, feel that same patience in your own body. No rush, no pressure. Just the steady, slow process of relaxation, piece by piece, muscle by muscle, thought by thought, settling toward sleep. Part 4. The pendulum. Time becomes precise. The next great revolution in timekeeping came not from a clockmaker, but from a scientist. Galileo Galilei, in the late 16th century, observed something curious while sitting in the Cathedral of Pisa during a long, perhaps boring service. A chandelier hanging from the ceiling, set swinging by a gust of wind, caught his attention. Picture young Galileo sitting in the pew, his attention drifting from the priest's sermon to this swinging lamp. Back and forth it swings, a long, slow arc, and he notices something. Each swing seems to take the same amount of time. Whether the swing is large, sweeping through a wide arc, or small, barely moving, the time for each complete swing appears constant. Lacking a clock to measure this, somewhat ironically, given what his observation would lead to, he uses his own pulse as a timekeeper, counting heartbeats as he watches the chandelier swing. And yes, the period appears constant. This property is called isochronism, from the Greek words meaning equal time. Years later, near the end of his life, blind and under house arrest for his astronomical views, Galileo would return to this observation and design a pendulum clock. He never built it himself. That work would be completed by others. But he conceived of the mechanism. A pendulum, swinging freely, would regulate the escapement of a clock, providing a much more reliable, consistent rhythm than the weighted foliot. The first working pendulum clock was built in 1656 by Christian Huygens, a Dutch mathematician and scientist. Suddenly, clocks became dramatically more accurate. Where the best balance wheel clocks might be accurate to within 15 minutes a day, a good pendulum clock could keep time to within 15 seconds a day. That's 60 times more accurate. The measurement of time had taken a leap forward in precision. The design is elegant in its simplicity. A weight hangs from a cord or chain. As it descends, it turns gears, and these gears move the clock's hands around its face. But the speed at which the weight descends is controlled by the pendulum. The pendulum swings, and with each swing, the escapement allows just one tooth of a gear to escape, advancing the mechanism by precisely one increment. The length of the pendulum determines the period of its swing. A longer pendulum swings more slowly than a shorter one. A seconds pendulum, one that takes exactly 1 second to swing from one side to the other, is about 39 inches long. Once you've set the length correctly, and once the clock is running, the pendulum swing remains remarkably constant. Except that it's affected by temperature. The pendulum rod, made of metal, expands when hot and contracts when cold. Even a tiny change in length changes the period of the swing. So, clockmakers developed temperature-compensated pendulums, using combinations of metals with different expansion rates, or using special alloys designed to resist temperature change. These gridiron pendulums, or mercury pendulums, were marvels of mechanical engineering, maintaining their accuracy across temperature changes. Picture a fine, long case clock, what we often call a grandfather clock. It stands in a hallway or a parlor, 7 feet tall, made of dark wood, perhaps oak or mahogany, polished to a deep shine. Through a window in the case, you can see the pendulum swinging, a flat disc of brass at the end of a long rod, catching the light as it moves. Tick, tock, tick, tock. The rhythm is slower than a heartbeat, steadier than breathing. The clock's face is painted white or cream, with black Roman numerals marking the hours. 2 hands, one long for minutes, one short for hours, both made of blued steel, elegant and simple. As you watch, the minute hand advances with a tiny click, barely visible, moving one small increment forward. It will take 60 of these tiny movements to complete 1 hour. Inside the case, the mechanism is a wonder of brass and steel. Multiple wheels turning at different rates. The escape wheel, its teeth carefully shaped, engaging with the pendulum's crutch. The weight chains, thick and heavy, wrapped around barrels. The two heavy weights themselves, hanging in the case, descending slowly, slowly over the course of a week. This clock will need winding once a week. Every 7 days, someone, perhaps the master of the house or a servant assigned the task, will open the case, take out a special key, and insert it into one of 2 winding holes on the clock's face. Turning the key, they'll wind up the weight that powers the clock's motion. Then, with the second hole, they'll wind the weight that powers the striking mechanism, for this clock chimes the hours, its bell clear and bright. The winding takes a few minutes, the key turned round and round, the resistance increasing as the weights rise higher in the case. There's a ritual to this. The same day each week. The same time. Taking out the key from its special drawer. The slight effort required. The satisfaction of ensuring the clock will continue its steady work for another week. This is caring for time itself. And at night, in the quiet hours, the clock's presence is felt even more strongly. The house is dark and still. Most of the family is asleep, but the clock continues its patient work. Tick, tock, tick, tock. A sound so constant, it becomes part of silence, noticed only when it stops. And then, on the hour, the clock chimes. The mechanism releases, the hammer strikes the bell. Bong, bong, bong. 3 o'clock in the morning, the deepest part of night. The sound echoes through the quiet house and then fades. The clock continues. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Pendulum clocks became objects of pride and status. A well-made clock from a renowned maker could cost as much as a year's wages for a skilled worker. But for the wealthy, it was worth it. A clock in your home meant you weren't dependent on church bells or the town clock. You controlled your own time, in a sense. You could measure it, divide it, allocate it as you wished. But pendulum clocks had a limitation. They needed to be perfectly level and perfectly still to work accurately. The pendulum's swing depended on gravity acting straight down. Tilt the clock, or move it, and the swing would be affected. This made pendulum clocks unsuitable for ships, which were constantly rocking on the waves. And solving the problem of accurate timekeeping at sea, that was the great challenge of the 18th century. A challenge with life or death implications. A challenge that would push clockmaking to new heights of precision. Let yourself drift now, like a ship on gentle swells, rocking slowly side to side. Let the rhythm of the pendulum carry you deeper into rest. Determining your latitude, how far north or south you were, was relatively straightforward. You could measure the angle of the sun at noon or observe the pole star at night, and with the proper tables and calculations, determine your latitude with reasonable accuracy. But longitude, how far east or west you were, that was another matter entirely. There was no celestial shortcut, no single observation you could make to determine longitude. Instead, longitude is fundamentally a matter of time. Here's why. The Earth rotates once every 24 hours, making a complete circle of 360 degrees. So every hour, the Earth rotates 15 degrees. If you know what time it is at your current location, and you also know what time it is at some reference point, say the port you sailed from, you can calculate your longitude. For every hour of difference, you're 15 degrees of longitude away from your reference point. Determining local time was easy enough. The sun reaches its highest point at local noon. Observe that, note the time, and you know your local time. The problem was knowing what time it was back at your home port at that exact same moment. The solution seemed obvious. Bring a clock with you. Pause. Set it to the time of your home port before you sail, keep it running throughout the voyage, and whenever you want to know your longitude, just compare local noon to the time shown on your clock. Pause. Except no clock of the 17th or early 18th century could keep accurate time on a ship. Pendulum clocks were hopeless. The rocking of the ship would throw off the pendulum's swing completely. Balance wheel clocks were better, but they were still affected by temperature changes, by humidity, by the constant motion of the vessel. Even the best clocks would gain or lose several minutes a day. And at sea, a few minutes of error could translate to dozens of miles of position error. Ships would miss islands, run aground on unseen reefs, become hopelessly lost. The problem was so serious that in 1714, the British government established the Longitude Prize, offering a reward of £20,000, an enormous sum, equivalent to several million pounds today, to anyone who could devise a practical method for determining longitude at sea to within 30 nautical miles. Many attempted. Astronomers proposed complex systems of lunar observations. Inventors suggested elaborate schemes involving sound signals or floating observatories. None proved practical. And then there was John Harrison, a carpenter and self-taught clockmaker from Yorkshire. Harrison believed the solution lay in creating a clock so precise, so stable, so unaffected by motion and temperature that it could keep accurate time even at sea. This seemed, to most experts, impossible. But Harrison was stubborn, meticulous, and brilliant. Over the course of more than 30 years, he would build 5 marine chronometers, each one an improvement on the last, each one pushing the boundaries of what was mechanically possible. His first marine clock, known as H1, was completed in 1735. It was large, weighing 75 pounds, and ungainly, but it represented revolutionary innovations. Instead of a pendulum, Harrison used a balance mechanism that was designed to be unaffected by the ship's motion. He used different metals in combination, designed to compensate for temperature changes. He employed rolling bearings and special escapements of his own design. Picture Harrison in his workshop, year after year, filing parts by hand, testing mechanisms, discarding designs that don't work, refining those that show promise. He's working at the limit of what's possible with the tools and materials available. Each gear must be precisely shaped. Each bearing must be perfectly smooth. The slightest imperfection will introduce error, will cause the clock to gain or lose time. He tests H1 on a voyage to Lisbon and back. It performs well, remarkably well, but Harrison knows it can be better. He begins work on H2, then H3, each time refining his ideas, pushing for greater precision. H3 takes him nearly 2 decades to complete. Imagine 19 years working on a single clock. 19 years of patient adjustment, of incremental improvement, of obsessive attention to detail. But by the time H3 is finished, Harrison has a new idea. He realizes that smaller is actually better. A large mechanism has more mass, more inertia, more friction. A small mechanism, precisely made, can be more accurate. And so he begins work on H4, a marine chronometer, roughly the size of a large pocket watch, just 5 inches in diameter. H4 is a masterpiece. Its mechanism is incredibly complex. More than 750 individual parts, many no larger than a grain of rice. But it's also incredibly robust. Harrison employs jewel bearings to reduce friction. He uses a special temperature-compensating balance wheel. He invents a new type of escapement. Every detail has been considered, refined, perfected. In 1761, H4 is tested on a voyage to Jamaica. The voyage takes 81 days. When the ship arrives, the chronometer has lost only 5 seconds. 5 seconds in 81 days. That translates to a longitude error of less than 1 nautical mile. It's an astonishing achievement, far exceeding the longitude prize requirements. But Harrison's struggles were far from over. The Board of Longitude was skeptical, demanding additional tests, questioning whether the result was luck rather than skill. Politics and professional jealousies complicated matters. It would take years more, and a personal appeal to King George III, before Harrison would finally receive the recognition and reward he deserved. But the impact of his work was undeniable. Marine chronometers, based on Harrison's designs, became standard equipment on naval and merchant vessels. Suddenly, navigation became far safer and more reliable. Ships could determine their position with unprecedented accuracy. Trade routes became more efficient. Exploration became more systematic. Picture a ship's chronometer of the early 19th century, sitting in its specially designed box in the captain's cabin. The box is lined with felt or velvet, padded to protect the delicate mechanism from shock. The chronometer itself is enclosed in a brass case, polished to a golden shine. It's mounted on gimbals, a system of pivoting rings, so that no matter how the ship rocks, the chronometer itself remains level. The captain visits the chronometer several times a day, checking its reading, recording the time in the ship's log. He winds it carefully, once a day, at the same hour every day, using a special key. The winding must be done gently, consistently. Too much force could damage the mechanism. Too little, and the chronometer might stop before the next winding time. This chronometer represents safety, represents the ability to find one's way home across trackless ocean. It's treated with reverence, with care. Some captains develop an almost personal relationship with their chronometer, coming to trust its steady ticking more than any crew member. At night, in the captain's cabin, if you listen carefully, you can hear it. Tick, 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 tick. Not the slow tick-tock of a pendulum clock, but a faster, lighter rhythm. The heartbeat of precision. The sound of reliability in an unpredictable world. And out beyond the cabin walls, the ocean stretches endless and dark. The ship rises and falls with the swells. Sails crack and flutter in the wind. Ropes creak. Water rushes along the hull. The stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns. And through it all, the chronometer continues its patient work, marking time, keeping the reference point steady, making navigation possible. Let yourself be carried by these ocean rhythms, the rise and fall of waves, the steady tick of the chronometer, the gentle rocking motion. Feel your body settling like a ship finding its balance on calm seas. There's a safety in precision, a comfort in knowing that time is being kept, that position can be determined. Rest in that certainty. Part 6. The Industrial Age. Time becomes universal. As the 19th century progressed, clocks became cheaper, more common, more accurate. What had once been a luxury item, affordable only to the wealthy, gradually became something that even working-class families might own. Time was becoming democratized, in a sense. But this created a new problem. Every town, every city set their clocks by local noon, the moment when the sun reached its highest point in that particular location. And because the Earth is round, the sun reaches its zenith at different moments in different locations. Local noon in London occurs about 5 minutes before local noon in Bristol, about 100 miles to the west. This didn't matter much when travel was slow. If you rode a horse from London to Bristol, taking 2 or 3 days for the journey, a 5-minute time difference was trivial. But then came the railways. By the 1840s, railway networks were spreading across Britain and other countries, connecting cities, speeding travel from days to hours. Suddenly, the confusion of local times became a serious problem. Each station along a route might have a different local time. How do you create a train schedule when every town defines noon differently? Trains were missing connections, arriving at the wrong times, causing confusion and sometimes danger. The solution was the adoption of railway time, a single, standardized time used across the entire railway network. In Britain, this was Greenwich Mean Time, the time at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, London. Railway stations installed 2 clocks, one showing local time, the other showing railway time. Gradually, railway time became the time everyone used. Local time persisted for a while in some places, but eventually it faded away. Picture a railway station in the 1850s. A grand building of brick and iron and glass, the air thick with coal smoke and steam. On the platform, a large clock mounted high on a wall or tower, its face easily visible to travelers. The clock shows railway time, the same time as every other station on the line, the same time as the clocks in London, in Manchester, in Edinburgh. Travelers consult their pocket watches, adjusting them to match the station clock. A businessman snaps open his watch case, turns the small winding crown, moving the hands forward or backward by a few minutes to synchronize with railway time. The watch is a lovely thing. Gold or silver, smooth and heavy in the palm. The inside mechanism visible through a crystal on the back. Tiny gears turning, the balance wheel oscillating back and forth in a blur of motion. This watch is a prized possession, expensive, carefully maintained, accurate to within a minute or two per day. As railways spread globally, so did the need for time standardization. In 1884, at the International Meridian Conference in Washington, D.C., use a calm, natural time agreed to establish a global system of time zones. The world would be divided into 24 zones, each 15 degrees of longitude wide, each 1 hour different from its neighbors. The prime meridian, 0 degrees longitude, would pass through Greenwich. This was revolutionary in its own quiet way. For all of human history, time had been local, specific to place. Now it was becoming global, standardized, synchronized. Someone in New York and someone in San Francisco could agree on what time it was within their respective time zones. A train schedule could coordinate movements across thousands of miles. Telegraph messages could be time-stamped with meaningful precision. Time was becoming infrastructure, a shared resource, a commons that everyone depended upon. In cities, clock towers became focal points. Town halls, railway stations, churches, and civic buildings vied to have the tallest tower, the most visible clock. These clocks were synchronized daily with the National Observatory's time signal. In London, a time ball was dropped at Greenwich Observatory at exactly 1 o'clock each day, a visual signal that allowed ship captains in the Thames to set their chronometers accurately. Later, time signals would be transmitted by telegraph, then by radio. At the appointed moment, the top of the hour or a few minutes before, a series of beeps or tones would be broadcast, allowing anyone with a receiver to set their clocks precisely. These pips, as they were called in Britain, became a familiar sound. 6 short beeps, then a longer one, marking the exact hour. Bip, 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 bip. Beep. These time signals improved continuously. By the early 20th century, time was being kept by precision pendulum clocks housed in temperature-controlled vaults, their pendulums swinging in near vacuum chambers to eliminate air resistance. These observatory clocks could keep time to within a few hundredths of a second per day. Imagine such a clock room in an observatory, a basement vault, deep underground where temperature variations are minimal. Thick walls of concrete provide insulation. The room is kept at a constant temperature, monitored continuously. In the center of the room, a series of precision clocks, their cases made of brass and glass, their pendulums swinging in vacuum tubes. These are not clocks you would recognize as such from the outside. They don't have faces with hands. They have electrical contacts that close at precise intervals, sending pulses to recording equipment. They tick, but the sound is different, a lighter, sharper sound. Click, 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 click. The timekeeper visits once a day, walking quietly on rubber-soled shoes so as not to introduce vibration. He checks the recording charts, comparing the clocks against each other, against astronomical observations. If one clock is drifting, gaining or losing even a tiny fraction of a second per day, he must determine why. Temperature variation? Barometric pressure change? Some mechanical flaw developing? This is time at the highest level of precision available in the early 20th century. Time maintained by dedicated experts, housed in specially designed facilities, treated as a scientific quantity as important as any other measurement. And from these master clocks, time flows out to the world, to the time balls and time guns that provide visual and auditory signals, to the telegraph lines that carry electrical pulses, to the radio transmitters that broadcast time signals across continents and oceans, to the clocks in railway stations, in factories, in schools, and homes. The world was becoming synchronized. More and more, people's lives were being structured not by natural rhythms, but by clock time. Factory workers arrived and departed by the clock. Trains departed on schedule. Meetings began at appointed hours. Time was becoming both more precise and more constraining. Let yourself feel the contrast between that constraint and this moment. Here, now, there is no schedule, no obligation, no deadline. The clocks can tick without you needing to watch them. Time passes, yes, but you need not measure it. You need not mark it. Just rest. Just drift. Part 7. The Atomic Age. Perfect Time. As the 20th century progressed, the demands for accuracy in timekeeping continued to increase. Radio navigation, telephone networks, electrical power grids, scientific research, all required increasingly precise time coordination. Even the best mechanical clocks, even the precision pendulum clocks in observatory vaults, weren't quite accurate enough. The problem is that mechanical clocks, no matter how well made, are affected by their environment. Temperature, pressure, humidity, gravity, vibration, all of these factors introduce tiny variations. These clocks don't look like clocks in any traditional sense. An atomic clock is a room full of electronic equipment, vacuum chambers, microwave generators, magnetic shields, detection equipment. There's no pendulum swinging, no balance wheel oscillating, no gears turning. Instead, a beam of cesium atoms travels through a vacuum tube, exposed to precisely tuned microwave radiation, and the response of the atoms is measured by detectors. The room is quiet, except for the soft hum of electronics and cooling fans. Banks of equipment lined up on racks, cables running between devices, indicator lights blinking slowly, steadily, screens displaying measurements, frequencies, stability data. The scientists who operate these clocks don't wind them or adjust pendulums. Instead, they monitor performance, compare one clock against another, watch for any drift or anomaly. They publish their measurements, contributing to International Atomic Time, T, from the French Temps Atomiques International, a weighted average of more than 400 atomic clocks in laboratories around the world. This is time maintained at a level of precision that would have been inconceivable to John Harrison or to the clockmakers of medieval Europe or to anyone before the atomic age. And yet, fundamentally, it's the same task, marking time's passage. Providing a reliable reference, allowing coordination and synchronization. Today, atomic time signals are broadcast from satellites, from radio transmitters, through the internet. GPS satellites each carry multiple atomic clocks, and your smartphone receives these signals, calculating your position and the current time with extraordinary precision. Computer networks synchronize to network time protocol servers, which in turn synchronize to atomic clocks. Financial markets timestamp transactions to the microsecond. Telecommunication systems coordinate to the nanosecond. We swim in an ocean of precise time, most of it invisible, most of it taken for granted. The watch on your wrist, if it's a radio-controlled or GPS watch, synchronizes itself automatically to atomic time. The clock on your phone updates continuously. You probably never think about it. You just glance at your device and know the time, accurate to the second, anywhere in the world. What would John Harrison make of this? What would a medieval clockmaker think? What would the ancient Egyptian watching shadows creep across stone think if they could see how we measure time today? They were doing the same thing we are, really, using the best technology available, pushing for greater precision, trying to pin down something fundamentally slippery, the passage of time itself. Time remains strange, doesn't it? We can measure it with extraordinary precision, but we can't slow it, can't stop it, can't reverse it. It flows, regardless of our attention, our measurement, our desire. We can only mark it, note it, observe it passing. And perhaps that's enough. Perhaps it's always been enough. The shadow moving across stone, the water dripping, the pendulum swinging, the atoms oscillating. All just different ways of watching time go by. Let yourself float now in this ocean of time. Past, present, and future, all flowing together. The history we've explored tonight fading into the background. Just this moment, this breath, this slow drift toward sleep. Time continues, but you need not keep track of it. The clocks will do that work. You can simply rest. Part 8. Personal time. The rhythm of a human life. Before we finish our journey through the history of timekeeping, let's consider time at its most personal level. Not the time of clocks and calendars, but the time as experienced, as lived, as felt in a human life. Every person carries within them multiple timescales, multiple rhythms. The fastest is the heartbeat. Your heart beats roughly once per second, sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but always that steady pulse. Ba, bum. Your own internal clock, older than any mechanical device, measuring your life in beats. Feel your heartbeat now, if you can. That rhythm has continued since before you were born, since you were a tiny cluster of cells in your mother's womb. It will continue until the very end of your life. Billions of beats over a lifetime, each one bringing oxygen and nutrients to every cell in your body, each one marking a moment of continued existence. Slower than the heartbeat is breathing. Roughly 12 to 20 breaths per minute at rest, though right now, as you relax towards sleep, your breathing is probably slowing, deepening. Breath is more voluntary than heartbeat. You can consciously control it, hold it, speed it, or slow it. But most of the time, it operates automatically, a rhythm you don't think about. Listen to your breath for a moment. The soft sound of air moving in and out. Feel your chest rising and falling. This rhythm, too, has been with you since your first breath. It will be with you until your last. Slower still are the cycles of hunger and fatigue. Hours between meals. The gradual accumulation of tiredness through the day, building to the point where sleep becomes irresistible. These cycles vary more than heartbeat or breathing, affected by activity, by when you last ate, by stress, by countless factors. But they're still rhythms, still internal clocks of a sort. And then there are the longer rhythms. The cycle of sleep and waking, roughly 24 hours, synchronized more or less with the rotation of the Earth. Even without clocks, even in constant darkness, humans maintain roughly this cycle, drifting slightly, but remaining close to 24 hours. It's built into us, an evolutionary inheritance from ancestors who lived by the rhythm of day and night. For women, there's the menstrual cycle, roughly a month, synchronized perhaps with ancient lunar rhythms, though the connection is not perfect, not consistent. Another internal clock, another rhythm. And beyond these biological rhythms, there are the rhythms of a human life. Childhood's slow days that somehow pass quickly in retrospect. The acceleration of time in adulthood, where years seem to flow faster and faster. The seasons marking annual cycles, not just in weather, but in life events, in cultural rhythms, in personal significance. We experience time subjectively, not objectively. An hour of boredom feels infinitely longer than an hour of engagement. A frightening moment expands, seeming to last longer than it actually does. A pleasurable experience passes in what feels like seconds. Time stretches and compresses based on our attention, our emotion, our state of mind. Memories, too, distort time. Recent events are crisp, detailed, occupying large spaces in memory. Older memories compress, years collapsing into impressions, into moments that stand out against a background that's grown fuzzy. The further back you look, the more compressed it becomes, until childhood is just a handful of vivid scenes floating in vagueness. And yet, in the moment, time feels continuous, feels like now. This present moment is all we ever truly experience. The past exists only in memory. The future exists only in imagination. There is only ever this breath, this heartbeat, this moment of consciousness. The clocks we've discussed tonight, the shadow clocks, the water clocks, the mechanical clocks, the atomic clocks, they're all attempts to make time objective, to measure it, to make it something we can agree on, can share, can coordinate around. And that's valuable, even essential for a complex society. But personal time, subjective time, remains. The felt experience of duration. The way an hour can feel like forever, or like nothing. The way time seems to accelerate as we age. The way the present moment expands when we're fully attentive, fully aware. Perhaps the deepest wisdom about time is learning to experience it rather than just measure it. To be present in the moment rather than always planning, always rushing toward the future or dwelling on the past. To feel the rhythm of your own heartbeat, your own breath, your own life unfolding. The clocks will continue their patient work. They'll mark the seconds, the minutes, the hours. They'll coordinate the world's activities. They'll provide structure and reference. But you don't have to watch them. Not now. Not as you drift toward sleep. Let time be unmeasured for a while. Let it flow without counting, without marking, without measuring. Just experience it. The slow deepening of relaxation. The gentle descent toward sleep. The present moment expanding, becoming all there is. Your heartbeat continues. Your breath continues. Time continues. But you can stop watching, stop counting, stop trying to hold on to it. Just let go. Just drift. And so, we've wandered through the history of timekeeping together. From shadows in water to atoms and satellites. From the simplest observations of the sun's movement to the most precise measurements of quantum transitions. All of it, ultimately, in service of the same goal, marking time's passage, providing coordination, creating shared reference points. But here, now, as you lie in the darkness or the soft light of your room, you don't need to keep track of time. The clocks will do that for you. Somewhere, atomic clocks are oscillating at their incomprehensibly fast rate. Somewhere, pendulums are swinging. Somewhere, the sun is cast in shadows across stone. Time is being kept. You can rest. If you're still listening to these words, that's perfectly fine. There's no right or wrong way to fall asleep. Some nights, sleep comes easily. Other nights, it takes longer. Either way is acceptable. Either way, you're resting, and rest is valuable in itself. Let your thoughts drift where they will. Perhaps you'll think about some detail from what we've discussed. The image of a clockmaker at his bench, or a ship's chronometer swinging on its gimbals, or the soft drip of water in a clepsydra. Perhaps your thoughts will wander to completely different topics. Perhaps you'll simply float in a space between waking and sleeping. Thoughts becoming dreamlike, logic loosening. All of that is fine. All of that is rest. Your breathing is slow and deep now. Your body is heavy and relaxed. Your mind is quiet or quieting. The day is done. The night is here. And sleep, in whatever form it takes for you tonight, is near. The sleep library will be here whenever you need it. More stories, more lectures, more quiet wanderings through ideas and history and imagination. But for now, this story is complete. Well, rest. Let time pass unmeasured. Let the clocks do their patient work while you do yours, which is simply to rest, to restore, to sleep. Good night.